Thank you very much, and welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining the session today. So my name is Claire Hughes and I'm from the University of Southampton as part of the Advancing Assessment project. I was due to be joined by two of my colleagues today, but unfortunately one of them has had some IT issues, and I'm not sure if my other colleague has managed to get on either, so we might be having some gremlins in the system. I'm working from home today at campus, but I can carry on and start off the presentation. So I have got some slides which I'll share. I'm just going to check Amy I can't see anybody else on the call bar on this list. So, okay, let me share my slides. Bear with me one moment. So can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Brilliant. So just to start off with today, in the chat, please do let us know your names and the institutions you're from. It's just useful for us to understand the context from where you are, potentially from around the world and the UK. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat and we'll be happy to come back to them at the relevant points. We will be using Padlet today, and I'm just going to try and drop in I'll drop that in a moment when my colleague joins, just to be able to, we've got some prompts for the second part of the discussion. But of course, we do really love tech, but we very much enjoy hearing from you directly too. So please do unmute your mic, join in the discussions, ask any questions. This is our opportunity the next 45 minutes to talk about something that I absolutely love, which is assessment and feedback, and I'd really love to hear from you directly too. So we're going to start the sort of two halves to this session. The first is just setting, I suppose, the scene as to why we're considering assessment and feedback in depth at the University of Southampton, thinking about some of those key themes and drivers, which I think very much ties into some of the things that the previous session was talking about as well. Thinking about actually what does the future of the assessment and feedback landscape look like, and then why we're actually reviewing that as part of an actual project at the university. But then the second half is very much where I'd really love us to be able to discuss so the enhancements you're all undertaking, but also some of the challenges too, because this is an area that we all need to actually talk about and move forwards together, because that's really the point of higher education, is collaboration and building knowledge between us and educating, and that's something that collectively we can all do together. So sort of why are we thinking about this? Within the UK, students' views are shifting in how they want to or can engage in education. It's a very different landscape, really driven by some very complex socio-economic themes that they have to battle and are challenged with. We know assessment and feedback is a central part of their university experience, and within the UK, certainly this remains a point of perceived weakness in how they see that overall experience. This is seen across the National Student Survey, which is an independent survey that the UK government run for all students in the third year of their study at undergraduate. And traditionally, across the questions, assessment and feedback, and this is this year's current results, is always one of the lower scoring sections. And for not for all, but for many institutions, assessment and feedback on their own institutional sections, assessment and feedback is one of the lowest areas. So that shows that students are telling us using a very strong voice that they don't actually consider assessment and feedback as one of the core areas that they feel gives a good experience. But NSS is only one indicator. There are many other drivers and impacts on assessment and feedback. As I mentioned, it's a really complex world for students to navigate. There's the cost of living crisis that we have here in the UK. On a world level, there's really complex geopolitics that affect our students. There's volatility in the job markets, and these are all things they're having to balance and consider when they're actually thinking about their education journeys with us. There's also a mental health crisis, we know, across young people. In the HEPI report this year, they noted that in the last set of big data that was collected, 30.4% of first degree undergraduate student populations disclosed a mental health condition. I'm sure when that next set of data comes out, that's going to probably be higher. And that's our responsibility to consider that when we're thinking about our curriculum and assessment and feedback. We know that there are workload pressures within higher education, creating wellbeing challenges, not just for our students, but our staff. So when we're thinking about assessment and feedback, we're thinking very much across the dual piece there. Artificial intelligence, I believe, brings great opportunities, but when we think about it from an assessment and feedback point of view, they bring complex and layered opportunities in how we actually feed that into our curriculum and assessment. We have awarding gaps for students, particularly across Black and white students, and we know that assessment and feedback, if not constructed well, actually adds to that and can increase that gap. We know that there's assessment overload. We hear that from both our staff and students regularly, and I'm sure we're not alone in that across the sector. But that assessment overload then drives a little bit of strategy and very much a transactional relationship with students on sort of surface learning to pass this thing at the end or be able to write enough words in the right way to pass the hurdle, as opposed to that holistic education we want to give them where they can be curious and they can take risks, etc. All of these things and many other things lead to a really sort of high stakes, high pressurized environment that our students and staff are living, working, learning and teaching within. So I suppose given all of those complexities, what can we actually do about that? How can we do things differently to minimise some of those impacts and some that are absolutely our responsibility to minimise and redress? We're very lucky to work with Professor Simon Walker, who recently produced a report through JISC around the sort of future trends of assessment. He outlined that he felt the way the assessment landscape was going, there is going to be an appetite to redesign assessment to actually counteract some of these challenges, including programme or part programme level formats. Much more co-design with students, and of course we heard that in the previous session. I think that's something that we're all adopting, and that's really a fantastic opportunity for us all. The acceleration of the adoption of different forms of assessment that are absolutely undertaken, but perhaps not across the wider institutions, and that's to mitigate or embrace generative AI and actually think about that from a range of point of views. There's a growing interest in compassionate assessment, and that's actually writing assessments for students that actually develop them and that enable them to be able to take risks and think about things in a different way. But that's also for our colleagues as well. And then offering assessment optionality. So that's not just offering lots of different types of assessment across modules. It's actually within a module giving students the opportunity to choose what style or mode of assessment actually sort of suits them the best. So with all of that, we felt that there was a change of approach that was needed, and the kind of key drivers for us in the project is to create a compassionate curriculum for staff and students, and that includes assessment and feedback. That inclusivity and accessibility in assessments have to be designed in from the start. We would love if we could make it so that actually nobody had to have an access agreement, because it's designed from the start to be able to enable all to thrive and succeed. We absolutely want to embed assessment and feedback strategy that is developmental for students, and that actually is modelled through the whole module, not just particularly at the end nearer the time that they have to hand something in. And co-design sits as a core ethos. We too believe that building staff and student partnerships and communities is absolutely going to be really important to be able to support the diverse range of student support needs that we have. So given all of that, the University of Southampton decided to commit to a strategic major project and invest in this in a pretty big way. It's a 5-year project because with all things, these things can't be changed overnight when you're talking about large scale cultural shifts, and the idea is to enhance our existing practices but also to transform assessment thinking. So we're working with teams on the now, but we're also working with them so as an institution we can actually be bringing in some of those future scoped assessment routes that I talked about earlier. We're driven by a core set of principles. You won't be surprised to know that the first two is assessment is accessible and assessment is inclusive. We're the champions of that, and we hold programme teams to account when we're talking to them on these principles, and that very much sits in many of the conversations we have. But the other area is in co-design. So whenever we work with a programme team, we actually ensure that we get to work with their students and we get them to working with their students, but also so that we're living that ourselves and being the champion. We're very lucky to have 8 interns that work with us, and they are a core part of our team, and actually undertake lots of the projects with us, but also are then able to interject that student voice in everything we do and hold us to account as a team as well, which is absolutely what we need. Outside of the interns, there is a wide project team, including ourselves within the assessment consultancy. There's 6 of us in that consultancy, and we're focused on a whole range of different aspects when it comes to assessment and feedback from both the student and staff point of view. But to really affect change across the whole assessment and feedback ecosystem in a sustainable way, we needed to review everything from start to end of that assessment and feedback journey. Therefore, the project doesn't just encapsulate the pedagogic piece where we're working with programme teams, but it's looking at the processes, the tools, systems, digital quality, and we set up 6 work streams as part of the project to make sure that we captured all of that across academic and professional services. And all of these work streams kind of fit with each other and inform each other and work through each other. And I think this is going to be the absolute key to making sure that we're ready for that future landscape that I mentioned. As part of the project, the assessment consultancy was set up, which is the area that I lead on myself, and I'm joined, I think, now by some of my colleagues in the call, Suzanne and Amy. The idea is this assessment consultancy lives on beyond the project because assessment and feedback changes constantly, and there's always a need for support. And if we really want to make it sustainable, that consultancy will need to be there beyond that 5-year scope. There's lots of work we do within that. But some of the main projects that we're working on at the moment one of them is STARS, which stands for Student Transformative Assessment Redesign with Students. And that basically sits off the back of the TESTA methodology, which lots of you will know about. But if you don't, it sits with working very closely with students. So it's initially working with the programme teams, identifying lines of inquiry and where we feel enhancements could be made within the programme. But then it's going out and working with students. So we do questionnaires and we do focus groups to really get in and underneath. And one of the most powerful questions we ask them in that session is, how does assessment make you feel? And we've had a whole range of different answers, but I think there's when you hear students talk about how stressed they feel around assessment, it makes you realise why you spend the long hours doing the job you do, because this is why it's really important, and it very much ties into the previous session where they talked about that sense of belonging and community as well. We're also identifying themes across the institution and then in building projects to kind of fill some of those gaps. as well, or always working with students as well on that. But we also provide tailored support, both individual and at programme level, because it might be that we're not working with particular teams on STARS or particular projects, but there still needs to be a space so that they have a team to come to talk through ideas or challenges they're facing around assessment and feedback. So as you can imagine, that keeps us quite busy. I mentioned that through the work we're doing on STARS, we're starting to collate themes. The reports we produce from all of that work we do are confidential to the programme teams, but we do collate the recommendations and the commendations, and from that we're able to kind of drive these institutional themes. So far we've identified 7 of areas, and these are things that are good practice as well as areas that need enhancement. None of these will be a surprise to any of you on this call, and I don't think these challenges are singular to us as an institution. Where I've come to really with this is there's 7 themes, but really the main 2 things that we hear consistently from programme teams and students are the 2 comms. One is communication. Transparent, open communication with students as partners is absolutely vital, and that actually lots of these things fall under that area, but also building communities between staff and students, because then each other understand the challenges and work together in that sense. So they're the 2 comms, communities and communications, that I think really underpin those 7 themes and our areas we're considering how we actually enhance and work with our programme teams and students on. So that's as much as I wanted to say, just as an initial introduction to why we think actually that assessment and feedback is so important, and I suppose how the assessment consultancy is working. But I did say at the start, one of the things we wanted to do was to actually be able to have a discussion with everyone on the call. Now, I think my colleagues have added in the Padlet link here, so please do go to those, and we've put some prompts down just to try and encourage discussion, but that's not an exhaustive list. So if you have other things that you want to talk about, thinking about assessment and feedback, then please do feel free to do so. So this is the point. I'm going to hand over to Amy, who's going to take us through our first set of prompt questions. Thank you very much, Amy.
Thanks so much, Claire, and good morning, everyone. Apologies, I was a bit late to the call, but I am here now and ready to lead us on the discussion segment. Hopefully you can see the Padlet link in the chat. Hopefully everyone can access that. And I'll talk us through kind of the first 3 questions to begin with. There's nothing to kind of look at on the slides, which is why we've stopped sharing. But that does also mean that if you'd prefer to kind of come off mic and speak to the questions or put the answers in the chat, please do feel free if you'd prefer to do that over commenting on the Padlet. But we'll start with the first question on the Padlet. And as I say, please feel free to either add to the Padlet or just come off mic or add to the Teams chat, whatever you'd prefer. But our first question is, what do you see as the biggest current challenges in assessment and feedback? So this can be in your context or just things that you've generally observed. So be really interested to hear people's thoughts on that just to get us started. I will keep half an eye on the Padlet as well. I'll give a bit of extra processing time. I'm aware it's before 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. So, well, at least in the UK time zone. So feel free to take a minute if you need to. I think while we're thinking about kind of challenges, I think a big one that we've been hearing about locally, and I'm sure that many others have been hearing about in their own contexts, has been the big G, Gen AI. We've been hearing a lot about this in the context of challenges towards assessment in Southampton. And I think a lot of the challenges around that kind of feel almost attitudinal in nature in the sense of people's stances towards Gen AI and what they assume students will be doing with it. So be interested to hear people's thoughts on that down the line potentially, but I will pause my ramble there. Oh, as if by magic, the first comment on the biggest current challenges is indeed about AI. There we go. I must have predicted that. So we've got the gap in digital skills amongst students and the gaps in staff knowledge. Yeah, absolutely. So I think we can't talk about Gen AI without considering it from a kind of equity point of view, right? So we've certainly heard cases at Southampton, kind of anecdotally, of some students kind of paying extra money for the premium versions of AI tools, and having kind of the extra fancy aspects at their disposal, but also that kind of digital literacy side of things, right? So some students just being more confident using those tools than others, and also the disparity, as acknowledged on the Padlet, between students and staff, right? So that's something that we've been certainly looking to explore in our context, and we've been attending a lot of kind of CPD events that colleagues have been running around kind of developing those kind of AI skills amongst staff, because I think we have to be realistic that students will be wanting to use Gen AI, and I think developing our own competencies in that area is probably an important starting place to understand how they're using it, and also kind of think about ways that we could harness Gen AI in constructive ways. Great. Okay, what else have we got here? Inconsistent and unclear expectations of assessments. Absolutely. This came out really strongly in some of the work we've been doing so far. This was one of Claire's two comms, and this is a really big challenge for students. Unsurprisingly, you know, that you'd think that this was something that is kind of a standard thing, but absolutely not. So I think we have to not assume that, you know, staff know how to write a clear assessment brief, for instance, and this is an area where it could definitely be worth investing in kind of professional development. I know that that's something that we're looking into in our CPD offer as an assessment consultancy as well. Inconsistent feedback practices goes hand in hand, absolutely. And this is another thing coming out really strongly in our work with students too, kind of the sense that marking might be subjective, or that depending on who's marking your work, the feedback experience might be really different. Oh, staff time. Yes, absolutely. Staff are feeling increasingly squeezed, but still want to give meaningful feedback. I talk a lot about rubrics these days, but also about co-creation of rubrics. Oh, amazing. That sounds great. We were working with a kind of program team yesterday, and I was chatting to a member of staff about kind of rubrics, and they were thinking about implementing it themselves because they were facing these exact same issues, right? So working with huge groups of students, and therefore having to have kind of a big marking team, and then realizing that everyone was marking in a bit of a different way, commenting on things a bit differently, even if it was all relevant, but students were kind of not such a fan of having different aspects of their work highlighted. And so she was also thinking about implementing a rubric to kind of work on standardizing. But I love the idea of co-designing rubrics as well, because I think that plays into that whole assessment literacy piece, right? And students understanding, you know, what that language means, and like what it means when we say, you know, lack of nuance, or you could be more critical, you know, all of these terms that are quite oblique and obscure to students. So I think that's an amazing idea to kind of incorporate co-design into that aspect. Fab. Oh, it's like I'm psychic. Literally, the next thing is about the language used, opaque language used in learning outcomes and assessment briefs, creating hurdles before students can even start their work. One student described it as secret language. Couldn't agree more. That's a great one. And that, I think that's true for many students, whether they're new to UK higher ed, whether they're international and there's a kind of physical language barrier as well as the secret language. I think there's a lot of work that could be done in thinking about kind of clarity of language. Absolutely. And I can see some agreement here. Yeah, fantastic. And pointing out the kind of the tensions there. Attempts by schools to systematize briefs sometimes result in overcomplicated instructions. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I can see how the co-design element and also allowing for some potential kind of departmental subtleties there could be beneficial. Amazing. So some really interesting responses to that first question. Secondly, we have, what are your students telling you about assessment and feedback, and how are you hearing about this? Okay, so this is a really interesting one to us because it's interesting to hear the channels that this is coming through as well as what students are saying. So parameter mismatches. Oh, a fellow colleague from Southampton, hello. A frequent issue I see students struggle with is a mismatch between stated aims of assignment and max word counts. Okay. So, oh, that's really interesting. So students kind of coming to sessions and saying that lecturers are asking for a lot in not many words, basically. That's really interesting one. And I think that, again, I feel like a lot of it comes back to the kind of co-design element again, perhaps giving opportunities for that creation of a dialogue leading up to the assessment deadline, with plenty of advance of students being able to question, okay, you say you want, this criticality or you want this nuance, but how do you expect us to do that? Thinking about the questions that I've had from students around assignments in the past, they've often been quite focused on kind of quantifying aspects of the assignment, in terms of how many sources should I use, how many examples should I use. And I think oftentimes as academics, we might feel a bit like, oh, this is a frustrating question to have to answer because I don't have something set in mind. And so you're kind of on the spot. But actually, this is a level of granularity that I think a lot of students really benefit from. And even if we aren't able to give kind of specific, you should use X number of words for this part, I think the more specific we can be about this, especially if we are asking for kind of complex higher order thinking skills, the more achievable that's going to be. So that's a great point, and I think that's a really relevant conflict. In terms of feedback, students often get notes saying essentially you didn't do enough, but how could they have within the guidelines? Yeah, okay. So again, linking to that kind of complexity within kind of a small word limit. That's a really interesting one, actually. Word count, again, very short word counts with no leeway, and feedback only says what needs to go in and not what could be removed. That's a really good point. And we have had a few students say things to that effect in our work with them too. So that's an interesting theme that I hadn't given enough thought, I think. So I think that's one for us to squirrel away and explore, maybe within that kind of co-design aspect too. Great. And again, the kind of engagement with an application of feedback. This is amazing. Students not seeing the value or the transferability of feedback once a module is complete. Yes, I feel like this links to so many things. We could think about this in a really broad brush way and think about the value of a module within a course, right? So how do teams communicate kind of how this module fits within the course? Oh, it's lovely to see a dog on screen. Hello. But also kind of thinking about our staff providing enough kind of feed forward, as it were, and thinking about, in your next piece of work to do more successfully, you can. Oh, great. So people building kind of competencies around feedback literacy too. That's great to hear. Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with assessment literacy as one of those really essential skills to kind of develop in parallel, as it were. That's great to hear about. Okay. We've got so many great things on the Padlet this time. This is great. I'm going to try and go through as thoroughly but also efficiently as possible because I am mindful of time. Students tell us about inconsistencies in our user interface or co-design sessions with students. We also hear about these issues in individual consultations. Okay, so kind of inconsistencies in terms of expectations. Lecturers find it hard to articulate what they expect and tell us that too. That's so interesting. So actually maybe some of that kind of lack of clarity in briefs that we're seeing from the student end maybe stems from challenges on the staff end in terms of how to clearly articulate what they're looking for in a piece of work. So that's maybe kind of an area of kind of CPD as much as anything else. Really interesting. Okay. How to prioritize elements of feedback as well and how to engage with it critically. So what to pay attention to and what to not, that definitely ties into the whole feedback literacy side of things and is complex when you think about the power dynamics, right? Students thinking that, what they're receiving in their feedback is the gold standard and they must apply it, very thoroughly, but not being sure how to do that, not being sure how to approach that critically. I completely agree. Okay, and I think we'll move on to the third question now, just because I can see things busily filling in on the Padlet. So the third question is, what is the future of assessment and feedback strategy in higher education? So people saying a number of interesting approaches to AI proofing that we might see more of. Yes, absolutely. So this kind of links to what Claire was saying earlier, I think, about AI being an opportunity rather than, strictly a challenge, right? So I think there are ways that we could explore that, but also AI proofing, right? So incorporating creativity and reflexivity, assessment choice, co-design. And again, this kind of goes back to my initial spiel that I said we'd leave the floor open to later, but I think I'm not sure about how everyone feels about their own context, but I think there can be a tendency of viewing students in a bit of a negative light when it comes to AI, assuming that they always want to use it to cheat, as it were. And in actuality, are we looking at the bigger picture here? Are there, wider variables at play within our assessment and feedback strategy that are pushing students to feel as though they have to use AI? Have other things that we haven't provided them that they need to be able to complete the assignment successfully independently? So I think there's definitely a wider discussion to be had here. I feel like I've monologued excessively here because I've been very excited about the Padlet. I will pause here and just say, if anyone would like to kind of chip in about any of those points, please do. So anything to do with kind of challenges, where do we see the future of assessment and feedback strategy going? How are you hearing about challenges from students? If anyone would like to kind of speak further to any of those points, please feel free.
I just read Alice's comment about students often being alarmed by exemplars and not knowing how to use them because their teachers haven't shown them how to use exemplars. And I have to say that that's a perspective that I hadn't thought of. So thanks, Alice, for sharing that. And it's interesting because I was talking to some staff about feedback really yesterday. And I talked about rubrics, and I had said about exemplars show students what good looks like. But of course, you have to show them, you have to break it down, don't you? Not just present the text, but say, this is why it's good. And I think staff have a lot of trouble with that because there's a lot of, I don't know, you could call it woo. In academia, it's like you know that that's right. You just know that that's a B1 and not a C2. You just know. So it's trying to articulate that, and I think staff can have a lot of trouble with that as well. So I'm definitely going to keep that in mind. So thanks for the discussion.
Great, thanks, Karina. Mark?
Yeah, just sort of slightly building on what Karina was saying, or well, not building, that's a bit highfalutin, reacting. I think, where my team comes in is, we can annotate those exemplars that the lecturers have to show, this is what this is made of, this is why it's effective. But a stopgap measure for lecturers who haven't had a chance to work with us yet or don't know we exist is probably to show, here's a good thing, a good bit of work, here's a not so good one, or one of these is good, one of them isn't. Tell me which one and why, right? And then have that. I mean, that's something you can probably do without having so much specialist knowledge. Yeah, not ideal perhaps, but.
No, that's a good tip though, I think. So like even being able to distinguish, characteristics of good versus less good. Something that struck me as we were just discussing that, because we often use that what does good look like expression, don't we? But I think something that has struck me from some of our recent work with students is the fact that there might be different levels of good that we need to consider as well. So, not always thinking about kind of the highest mark in the cohort and using that as our exemplar, but also thinking about students that are aiming for, 2 2s or 2 1s, what do they need to be achieving to get that level if that's what they're looking for? Because I agree that, if those kind of 2 2 or 2 1 students are looking at, an exemplar that's exceptional and kind of a high first, they might not really know where to start with that, right?
That's how, the way we tackle that is to show variation. So this is one way you can express the critical engagement that this assessment's asking you for. Or, you could do it this way. And you might come up with another way, but there's probably 3 or 4 things that you need to combine. Which are these 3 or 4 things? And how you get there maybe is a bit more up to you, or you get to control.
That's nice. Yeah, giving a bit more kind of autonomy there. I like that. Sandy?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of exemplars, but I can see that I hadn't really thought about that kind of potential conflict around how it could be perceived. But one of the things that we do with them is we do tend to kind of do lots of activities around the exemplar to kind of, rather than just sort of read them. And at the same time, one of the things I'm aware of is that sometimes when we're showing not so good writing as opposed to good writing, there are people sitting in the room who are going, that's how I write, that not so good writing is how I write. So one of the things I've started trying to do now is sort of say, look, lots of us write like the not so good on our first drafts, but the whole thing about writing is rewriting. So this might be your first draft, but you can kind of, good writing is rewriting. It's not just that first draft. So yeah, I love exemplars, but I think, there's lots of things around them that need thinking through a bit, don't they? So.
Absolutely. I think as always, we get excited about exemplars, and I think rightly so, but I think it's about how they're framed for students, which again all comes back to that kind of communication piece of not only providing students with the resources, but guiding them on how to engage with them and how to interpret them, I think is a big piece, and something that we shouldn't assume that they come pre-equipped with the knowledge of, I guess. Great. Okay, I am mindful of time. Oh, but yes, Georgia, come on, hop in.
Sorry, I was thinking about this really interesting discussion about exemplars, and I just wanted to share a bit of my experience as well, because sometimes exemplars are kind of perceived as templates, and that's really the tricky bit, isn't it? But the other thing that sometimes is confusing for students, I find, is that they find something that's given to them as a good example, and they think it's good at everything. But obviously, a good example might be better at, I don't know, maybe a dissertation has a better literature review, but doesn't have a strong discussion, or maybe it has a really strong methodology section, but the literature review, could be not as good, let's say. Or it might have excellent kind of range of sources, but not necessarily as excellent depth of argument. So I think it is also worth thinking about examples and talking about what criteria are they really excelling at and what perhaps they're not meeting as well, kind of breaking down what good looks like and linking it back to the assessment criteria. So yeah, that's kind of my contribution.
No, that's great and really useful to think about, right? And I guess that ties back into partly what Mark was saying about showing students that there are different paths to get to, a particular level or a particular grade. It doesn't have to be exceptional in all areas to get a first or a 2-1, for instance. There can be strengths and less strong areas. That's great. Okay, I believe we had 40 minutes for this slot, so I won't kind of go on to the other discussion questions, but please do have a look at the Padlet and feel free to kind of comment on other people's and upvote and that sort of thing, and we'll certainly be taking a look at those. So thank you for your input, and I'll pass back to Claire to kind of close us out.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks for facilitating, I think, what was a really fantastic discussion. And as I said at the start, you know, I love nothing more than a good old discussion about assessment and feedback, but there is a serious side to it because, you know, we do need to share all the things that we're doing and things that are working or not working and sort of support each other across this space. And I think one of the challenges with assessment and feedback is, you saw with the 7 themes, we can't disconnect any one of those. They're all so integrated. So we have to work right down at the very basic levels of the hygiene factors of some of the things we've just been talking around about actually telling students what it is we actually want them to do with an assessment and actually building that assessment literacy through the whole module, not just like, oh, there's a couple of weeks before you have to hand in, so I'll do a quick half an hour in a session, just sort of talking it through, right through to the other end of the scope where we were talking about AI as part of the discussion and actually trying to calm teams and say, actually, let's look at this at a whole program level, because does every assessment have to be 100% secure, especially if it's a very small weighting, and actually thinking about that rather than allowing everybody to race back to the exam halls or just put in oral assessment for everything, which then adds to the stress and burden, particularly for groups of students that's a challenge for. So it's such a complex area. But we very much enjoy working in that area, and thank you so much to all of you for engaging in the discussion today. Please do keep in touch with us. We do have a shared inbox, advancing assessment at sutton.ac.uk. I've put the link in the chat. We do have a small web page. There's not much on there, but it does give you some sense of what we're trying to do. So please do, let's continue the conversation. So thank you very much, and I very much hope the rest of the sessions go well. Thank you.
Thanks both Claire and Amy, and the rest of the team who prepared all that. I must say I did not expect to be as participatory and active at this time of night in New Zealand, so it must have been a really good session. Yeah, thank you for that.